The 4th Cavalry Regiment is a United States Army cavalry regiment, whose lineage is traced back to the mid-19th century. It was one of the most effective units of the Army against Indians on the Texas frontier. Today the regiment exists as separate squadrons within the U.S. Army. The 1st Squadron of the 4th Cavalry's official nickname is Quarter Horse, which alludes to its 1/4 Cav designation. The 3rd Squadron of the 4th Cavalry's official name is Raiders. Today the 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry, 2nd Squadron, 4th Cavalry, 4th Squadron, 4th Cavalry, and the 6th Squadron, 4th Cavalry are parts of the 1st Infantry Division, while the 3rd Squadron, 4th Cavalry, serves as part of the 25th Infantry Division. On the 23rd of September 2009, the 4th Squadron, 4th Cavalry, officially stood up at Fort Riley, Kansas as part of the 1st Devil Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. On the 28th of March 2008, the 5th Squadron, 4th Cavalry, officially stood up at Fort Riley, Kansas as part of the 2nd Dagger Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. The 6th Squadron, 4th Cavalry, served as part of the recently inactivated 1st Infantry Division, 3rd Duke Brigade, at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Origin and early service. In 1855, the United States Congress recognized the need for mounted regiments in the U.S. Army in addition to the 1st and 2nd Regiments of Dragoons and the Regiment of Mounted Riflemen. The 1st Cavalry Regiment, later redesignated as the 4th Cavalry Regiment, was organized under the Act of 3 March 1855. On the 26th of March 1855, the regiment was organized at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. The regiment's first commander was Colonel Edwin V. Sumner, who served from the 3rd of March 1855 to the 16th of March 1861. In August 1855, the regiment was transferred to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Colonel Sumner had two missions. The first was to keep the peace between the pro-slavery and Free State factions in Kansas. The second was to protect settlers from attacks by Cheyenne warriors. The 1st Cavalry Regiment, along with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, was authorized in 1855 and formed at Jefferson Barracks, Mo. All field-grade officers and one-half of the company-grade officers were to come from existing Army units. The other half of the company-grade officers and most of the enlisted men came from civilian life. Each company sent out one lieutenant and one sergeant to city after city to recruit men to fill the ranks. Posters displayed in each city promised good clothing, rations and medical attention. The pay rate was $12 a month for privates, $14 for corporals, $17 for duty sergeants, and $22 for first sergeants. The regiment had 4 field-grade officers, 1 full colonel in command, 1 lieutenant colonel as second in command, and 2 majors. Each of the 10 companies had a captain, 1 first lieutenant, 1 second lieutenant, 4 sergeants, 4 corporals, and 84 privates. Also attached to each company was a 1 farrier and blacksmith and 2 buglers. Each company had horses of a distinctive color. This served 2 purposes. In addition to the dramatic effect on parade, the distinctive color made it easy for members of the regiment to locate the company in the heat of battle. The assigned colors were: Company A had sorrels, B, grays, C, sorrels, D, bays, E, roans, F, sorrels, G, blacks, H, bays, I, sorrels, and K, bays. The buglers had white horses. The officers each had 2 horses. They could select the color of their choice. Officers were required to provide the uniforms, equipment and horses. The new recruits, after a physical exam, were trained in horsemanship and as cavalrymen at Fort Leavenworth and Jefferson Barracks. In the fall of 1855, the regiment was ordered to participate in an expedition against the Sioux. As it turned out, the regiment were not directly involved in the major engagement with the Sioux. In 1856, the regiment was engaged in maintaining the peace in the Kansas Territory between the pro-slavery group who fought to make the territory a slave state, and the Free State faction who bitterly opposed them. This conflict had given rise to the term "Bleeding Kansas." Its first colonel, Sumner, and Lieutenant Colonel Joseph E. Johnston, were both future Civil War generals. During the summer of 1856, Cheyenne war parties attacked 4 wagon trains, killing 12 people and kidnapping 2. The commander of the Department of the West recommended that the Cheyenne be punished for their attacks on emigrant trains. He recommended that any action be put off until spring of 1857. In May 1857, preparation began for the expedition with the organizing of the 1st Cavalry under Colonel Edwin Vose Summer at Fort Leavenworth. Summer divided the regiment into 2 columns in order to circle the Cheyenne hunting grounds in central Kansas Territory. One column, under Major John Sedgwick, departed on May 18 with 4 companies, 5 Delaware Scouts and 40 wagons, heading west along the Arkansas River past Bent's Fort north up to the South Fork of the Platte River. There they were to meet Sumner's column, which had left Fort Leavenworth on May 20 with 4 cavalry companies, 300 cattle and 51 wagons. Sumner's column went north and then west up to Fort Kearny, where 3 companies of the 6th Infantry Regiment and 2 companies of the 2nd Dragoons, 5 Pawnee Scouts and 10 more wagons were added. After considerable difficulty in crossing the South Platte River, Sumner's column and Sedgwick's columns met at the South Platte as planned on July 4. The whole regiment then traveled east through central Kansas, to the rendezvous with the Cheyenne on the Solomon River. The map in the inset shows the routes taken by both columns. Meanwhile, the Cheyenne, about 300 strong, were midway between the 2 columns, probably around the Republican River, where they had spent the previous winter. The Cheyenne consisted of both Northern Cheyenne and Southern Cheyenne. They knew the U.S. cavalry were searching for them, so they remained banded together longer than they normally did. On July 29, 1857, the regiment caught up with the Cheyenne on the bank of the Solomon River. As the 2 groups paused within about a mile of each other, the cavalry commander, Col. E.V. Sumner, gave the command, "Gallop March." Both groups approached each other at full speed. Colonel Sumner then commanded, "Sling carbines. Draw sabers. Charge." It was the first time sabers had been used in the West. The astonished Indians, whose medicine, administered by holy men before the battle, protected them from carbines but not from sabers, became terrified when they saw the sabers. They pivoted and ran as fast as the horses would carry them away from the troopers. The chase lasted for about 7 miles before the Indians, having fast horses, pulled ahead too far for the cavalry to follow. During the brief fighting that took place during the chase, 2 troopers were killed and 9, including Lieutenant J. E. B. Stuart, the future Confederates' most famous cavalry general during the Civil War, were wounded. An estimated 9 Indians were killed on the field and an unknown number were wounded. The cavalry wounded and a detachment of infantry were left behind in a makeshift fort while the rest of the 1st Cavalry followed the Indians as best they could. This engagement was the climax of the Cheyenne Expedition, which began 2.5 months earlier at Ft. Leavenworth, Kansas. After the battle, the regiment left the wounded, including J.E.B. Stuart and one company of infantry, and followed the trail of the Cheyenne south towards the Arkansas River. They found and destroyed a large abandoned village that had recently been occupied, but were not able to catch the rapidly dispersing Indians. The regiment received orders to split up and send 4 companies under Major Sedgwick to join Col. Albert Sidney Johnston at Fort Kearny to become part of the Utah Expedition, while the other 2 companies were to proceed to Fort Leavenworth under Col. Sumner. However, before reaching Fort Kearny, Major Sedgwick received further orders to return to Fort Leavenworth to rejoin the rest of the regiment. The regiment was Colonel Robert E. Lee's last command in the U.S.Army before the American Civil War. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, the 1st Cavalry Regiment was dissolved and reorganized. Many of its commissioned officers rose to prominence during the war, including Lee as well as George B. McClellan and J.E.B. Stuart. Civil War. As early as 1854, the War Department had been wanting to redesignate all mounted regiments as cavalry and to renumber them in order of seniority. As the 1st Cavalry Regiment was the 4th oldest mounted regiment in terms of active service, it was redesignated as the 4th United States Cavalry Regiment on the 3rd of August 1861. Most of the regiment was assigned to the Western Theater and fought against Confederates in Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, and the Indian Territory. In 1861–62, 2 companies served with distinction in Virginia in the Army of the Potomac before being reunited with the rest of the regiment in Tennessee. Those companies fought in the major battles of First Bull Run, the Peninsula Campaign, Fredericksburg and Antietam. The bulk of the regiment fought gallantly and continuously in the Western Theater from Shiloh to Macon, participating in the fights at Chickamauga, Stones River, and Battle of Nashville. Civil War service, with so many regiments being sent east for the war effort. The 1st U.S. Cavalry was initially kept on the frontier until militia-type units were raised to protect against Indian raids. On the 22nd of June 1861, a former 1st Cavalry officer, George McClellan, now a Major General, requested Company A and Company E to serve as his personal escort. These 2 companies saw action in the Bull Run, Peninsula, Antietam and Fredericksburg campaigns, not rejoining the regiment until 1864. The rest of the 1st Cavalry was committed to action in Mississippi and Missouri. Since 1854 it had been advocated to redesignate all mounted regiments as cavalry and to renumber them in order of seniority. This was done on the 3rd of August 1861. As the 1st Cavalry was the 4th oldest mounted regiment, it was redesignated as the 4th Cavalry Regiment. During the early years of the Civil War, Union commanders scattered the cavalry regiments, conducting company, squadron and battalion operations. The 4th Cavalry was no exception, with its companies scattered from the Mississippi River to the Atlantic coast, carrying out the traditional cavalry missions of reconnaissance, screening and raiding. In the first phases of the war in the West, companies of 4th Cavalry saw action in various Missouri, Mississippi and Kentucky campaigns, as well as the seizure of Forts Henry and Donelson and the Battle of Shiloh. On the 31st of December 1862, a 2-company squadron of the 4th Cavalry attacked and routed a Confederate cavalry brigade near Murfreesboro, Tennessee. In 1863–64, companies of the 4th saw further action in Tennessee, Georgia and Mississippi. On the 30th of June 1863, another squadron charged a 6-gun battery of Confederate artillery near Shelbyville, Tennessee, capturing the entire battery and 300 prisoners. By the spring of 1864, the success of the large Confederate Cavalry Corps of J.E.B. Stuart had convinced the Union leadership to form their own cavalry corps in the East under General Philip Sheridan. The 4th Cavalry was ordered to reunite as a regiment and, on the 14th of December 1864, it joined in the attack on Nashville, Tennessee, as part of the Western Cavalry Corps commanded by General James Wilson. In the hard-fought battle, the 4th helped turn the Confederate flank, sending them in retreat. As the Confederate forces attempted a delaying action at West Harpeth, Tennessee, an element of the 4th Cavalry led by Lt. Joseph Hedges charged and captured a Confederate artillery battery. For his bravery, Hedges received the Medal of Honor, the first one to be bestowed on a member of the 4th Cavalry. In March 1865, General Wilson was ordered to take his cavalry on a drive through Alabama to capture the Confederate supply depot at Selma. Wilson had devoted considerable effort in preparing his cavalry for the mission, and it was a superbly trained and disciplined force that left Tennessee, led by the 4th Cavalry. As the column moved south into Alabama, it encountered Confederate cavalry leader Nathan Bedford Forrest. With superior numbers and firepower, Wilson's force defeated the Confederates, allowing the Union troopers to arrive in Selma the next day. On the 2nd of April 1865, the attack on Selma commenced, led by the 4th Cavalry in a mounted charge. A railroad cut and fence line soon halted the mounted attack. Dismounting, the regiment pressed the attack and stormed the town. Selma's rich store of munitions and supplies were destroyed, along with the foundries and arsenals. Wilson next turned east to link up with General Sherman. His force took Montgomery, Alabama, and Columbus, Georgia, before arriving in Macon, Georgia, where word came of the surrender of Lee's and Johnston's armies. The regiment remained in Macon as occupation troops. After participating in the Battle of Columbus, the last battle of the war, the regiment assisted in capturing fugitive Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Indian Wars. In August 1865, the 4th Cavalry was sent to Texas. At various times during the next 13 years, units from its 12 companies occupied military posts between the Rio Grande and Jacksboro, between San Antonio and San Angelo. See 5th Military District for reports of the 4th Cavalry in Texas between 1867 to 1869. Before 1871, the operations of the regiment were limited to guarding the mail and settlements against Indians and to desultory attempt to overtake bands of Indian raiders. A regiment's commander during this period, Col. Lawrence Spike Graham, never had to lead a major campaign, and none of the regiment's 14 skirmishes with Indians was of major significance. However, in December 1870, Colonel Ranald S. Mackenzie was assigned command of the 4th Cavalry, with orders to put a stop to Comanche and Kiowa raids along the Texas frontier. On the 25th of February 1871, Mackenzie took command of the 4th Cavalry at Fort Concho. A month later, he moved the headquarters of the regiment to Fort Richardson, near Jacksboro. Some companies of the 4th remained at Fort Griffin and Fort Concho. In May, while General William T. Sherman, then the commanding general of the army, was at Fort Richardson, the Kiowas brutally mutilated some teamsters from a wagon train on nearby Salt Creek Prairie. A few days later at Fort Sill, Sherman had 3 leaders of the raid, Satanta, Satank, and Ado-Etta, arrested and had Mackenzie return them to Jacksboro to stand trial for murder. On the way, an enlisted trooper killed Satank when he tried to escape. White Bear and Big Tree were later sentenced to life imprisonment. In August 1871, Mackenzie led an expedition into Indian Territory against the Comanches and Kiowas who had left the agency, but he was later ordered to return to Texas. He then led 8 companies of the 4th Cavalry and 2 companies of the 11th U.S. Infantry, about 600 men, in search of Quahadi Comanches, who had refused to go onto the reservation and were plundering the Texas frontier. On the 10th of October, he skirmished with a group of them in Blanco Canyon, near the site of present Crosbytown, but the entire band escaped across the plains. The following summer, Mackenzie, with 6 companies of the 4th Cavalry, renewed his search for the Quahadus. After establishing his supply camp on the freshwater fork of the Brazos River southeast of present Crosbytown, Mackenzie with 5 companies of cavalry followed a cattle trail across the unexplored high plains into the New Mexico Territory and returned by another well-watered Comanchero road from Fort Buscom, near the site of present Tucumcari, New Mexico, to the site of present Canyon. At the head of 222 cavalrymen on the 29th of September, he surprised and destroyed Chief Moway's village of Quahadi and Kitsateca Comanches on the North Fork of the Red River about 6 miles east of the site of present-day LaForce, Texas. An estimated 52 Indians were killed and 124 captured, with a loss of 3 cavalrymen killed and 3 wounded. For almost a year, both the Kiowas and Comanches remained at peace. In March 1873, Mackenzie and 5 companies of the 4th Cavalry were transferred to Fort Clark with orders to put an end to the Mexican-based Kikipu and Apache depredations in Texas, which had cost an alleged $48 million. On the 18th of May 1873, Mackenzie, with 5 companies of the 4th Cavalry, crossed the Rio Grande into Mexico. They then surprised and burned 3 villages of the raiders near Remolino, Coahuila. The cavalrymen killed 19 Indians and captured 41, with a loss of 1 trooper killed and 2 wounded. The soldiers recrossed the Rio Grande into Texas at daybreak the next morning, with some of the men having ridden an estimated 160 miles in 49 hours. The raid and an effective system of border patrols brought temporary peace to the area. The John Wayne movie Rio Grande is loosely based on this incident. When the Southern Plains Indians opened the Red River War in June 1874, the Grant administration discarded its Quaker peace policy and authorized the military to take control of the reservations and subdue all hostile Indians. General Philip H. Sheridan, commander of the Division of the Missouri, ordered 5 military expeditions to converge on the hideouts along the upper Red River country. In the ensuing campaign, the 4th Cavalry was the most successful. On 26-27 September, it staved off a Comanche attack at the head of Tule Canyon, and, on the morning of the 28th of September, descended by a narrow trail to the bottom of Palo Duro Canyon. There it completely destroyed 5 Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne villages, including large quantities of provisions, and captured 1,424 horses and mules, of which 1,048 were slaughtered at the head of Tule Canyon. Afterward, Mackenzie, with detachments of the regiment, made 2 other expeditions onto the high plains. On the 3rd of November, near the site of Tahoka, in the last fight with the Comanches, the cavalrymen killed 2 and captured 19 Indians. In the spring of 1875, Mackenzie and elements of the 4th Cavalry from various posts in Texas were sent to Fort Sill to take control of the Southern Plains Indians. Meanwhile, the Indians in Mexico had renewed their marauding in Texas. In 1878, General Sherman, at the insistence of the Texans, transferred Mackenzie and 6 companies of the 4th Cavalry to Fort Clark. This time Mackenzie led led a larger and more extensive expedition into Mexico, restored a system of patrols, and re-established peace in the devastated region of South Texas. Outside Texas, Mackenzie and the 4th Cavalry administered and controlled the Kiowa, Comanche and the Cheyenne Arapaho reservations for several years, and, after the defeat of George Armstrong Custer's command at the Battle of Little Bighorn in June 1876, forced Red Cloud and his band of Sioux and the Northern Cheyennes to surrender. In the autumn of 1879, Mackenzie with 6 companies of the 4th Cavalry subdued the hostile Utes in southern Colorado without firing a shot, and in August 1880 forced them to move to a reservation in Utah Territory. Immediately thereafter, the 4th Cavalry was transferred to Arizona Territory, where Mackenzie was to assume full command of all military forces in the department and subdue the hostile Apaches. Within less than a month, the Apaches had surrendered or fled to Mexico, and on the 30th of October, Mackenzie and the 4th Cavalry were transferred to the new District of New Mexico. By the 1st of November 1882, when W.B. Royal replaced Mackenzie as colonel, the 4th Cavalry had forced the White Mountain Apaches, Jicarilla Apaches, Navajos, and Mescaleros to remain peacefully on the respective reservations. From 1884 to 1886, the 4th Cavalry again operated against the Apaches in Arizona and helped capture Geronimo. Particularly noteworthy was B Troop's pursuit of Geronimo into northern Mexico, led by Captain Lawton and Surgeon Leonard Wood. Thus ended the regiment's participation in the Indian Wars. In 1890, the regimental headquarters was moved to Fort Walla Walla, Washington. The regiment split, with half going to the Department of the Columbia and half to the Department of California at the Presidio of San Francisco. The California contingent provided the first superintendent and park guardians for the General Grant, Sequoia and Yosemite National Parks in 1891. Early 20th century. The 4th Cavalry served on the Mexican border in Texas from 1911 to 1913. For the next 6 years, the regiment served at Schofield Barracks in the territory of Hawaii and did not participate in World War I. World War II. By World War II, the regiment had exchanged its horses for armored vehicles, tanks, and was redesignated the 4th Cavalry Group. It put ashore the first Allied soldiers of the D-Day invasion on the Isles Saint Marcouf Islands off the coast of France. With the islands unoccupied, but heavily booby-trapped, the cavalrymen came ashore at Utah Beach. The regiment added to its laurels in fierce fighting among the hedgerows of Normandy and in the Hergent Forest during the Battle of the Bulge, Vietnam War. In 1965, the 1st Squadron of the 4th Cavalry deployed to the Republic of Vietnam with the 1st Infantry Division, spending 8 years fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The squadron's firepower, mobility, and shock effect led to the use as fire brigades at the scenes of the hottest action. They were followed by the 3rd Squadron, a 4th Cavalry. Both divisions were posted near Saigon and participated in some of the largest operations of the Vietnam War. Gulf War. In 1990, the 1st Squadron deployed to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Shield. This led to the squadron's spearhead of the division assault into Iraq during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. On the 4th of May 1991, the 1-4 Cavalry received the Valorous Unit Award for service in the Gulf. Excerpt from orders. The 1st Squadron, a 4th Cavalry, led the 1st Infantry Division's attack across Iraq and Kuwait, cutting the Iraqi Army's escape route, the Kuwait City, Basra Highway. The squadron continued its rapid advance, culminating with the capture of the Safvan airfield. During this drive, the squadron destroyed 65 tanks, 66 armored personnel carriers, 66 trucks, 91 bunkers, and captured 3,000 enemy soldiers. 2nd Squadron served with the 24th Infantry Division Aviation Brigade. Balkans conflict. In 1995, 1-4 Cavalry was the 2nd Cavalry Unit deployed to Bosnia and Herzegovina, supporting the peacekeeping mission set forth by the Dayton Peace Accord, for a period of 11 months at Camp Molly, Camp Elysia called the Dog Pound near Kalasia, and Eagle Camp at Tuzla. 1999 and 2000 saw the air cav elements of the Quad Horse returning to the Balkans, this time Kosovo, as members of Operation Joint Guardian 2.